Okay, thank you. So we'll start as we always do. Hopefully I can move ahead here. As we always do with a prayer and a land acknowledgement as well. So we'll sign ourselves in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Ever-present God, we always walk in your light and love, surrounded by your care and concern. Our life is a journey with the many choices we make along the way. Grant that we may follow the way of Jesus with eyes of faith and hope, hearts of kindness and love, and minds of justice and peace, always supported by your guidance, your strength, and your safety. May we discover your presence in the people and events we encounter each day as we try to proclaim the good news of the gospel by walking and acting justly, walking and loving tenderly, and walking humbly with you and with one another. Together we ask this through Jesus Christ, your Son, who walks with us each day. Amen.
Out of our deep respect for Indigenous peoples in Canada, we recognize that all Toronto Catholic District School Board properties are situated on the traditional territories of
the Anishinaabe,
the Haudenosaunee Confederacy,
and the Wendat peoples.
we also acknowledge the land covered by Treaty 13 is held by the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation,
And Toronto is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Covenant.
We also recognize the contributions and enduring presence of the First Nations,
Métis,
and Inuit peoples
in Ontario and the rest of Canada.
Okay, fantastic. So let's begin with an outline of what we're going to talk about today, or what I'm going to try and convey to you. We're going to sort of touch on four general areas related to underachievement and wellness in students who are gifted and identified as gifted. We're going to first talk about the giftedness identification. Just want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page and that we understand the sorts of things that gifted students can do well. And the sorts of tests that we use to find those things out. So what does it mean to have advanced problem-solving abilities? What does it mean to be gifted? Then we'll switch over to success at school. We'll talk about those high intellectual abilities and are they enough to succeed? I think maybe even the way I'm asking the question, you might know what the answer is. And what else influences academic achievement? Because there are factors over and above intellectual functioning that are very important for success at school, and we'll talk about that. The third thing we'll talk about are common characteristics of gifted students. So one of the interesting things that sort of was reinforced in sort of updating this presentation for you is that the way that wellness, achievement, engagement, and all the things that we're going to talk about today, how they appear in the classroom are different for many students who are gifted, that there are particular characteristics or traits that seem to run very closely with giftedness that are common in kids who are gifted, that make those concerns look different in the classroom, okay? We'll talk about those risks, and we'll also talk about those protective factors, the things that we can do to support students in the classroom and at home with you guys when they're with you. And then the last part is what to look out for and what to do when there are concerns, okay? And we'll give you some just beginner resources of things you can do at home and what you need to do if you need more support beyond what's immediately available to you or in the classroom, okay? So let's start at the beginning with the criteria of giftedness itself. And all I've really done here is take the Ministry of Education criteria for giftedness, which is one long big sentence, and divided it into 3 bullet points for us to sort of consider as we go. So giftedness, according to the Ministry of Education, is an unusually advanced degree of general intellectual ability. This ability requires differentiated learning experiences of a depth and breadth beyond those normally provided in the regular school classroom, okay? And those learning experiences satisfy the higher level of educational potential needed, okay? So students who are identified with giftedness seem to require, at least from what we can see from this definition, more in terms of engagement and content, the breadth and depth of content of what's going on in the regular classroom, that somehow they need more or some extension of that. We'll talk a little bit about what that should look like, maybe could look like in the classroom. In terms of here at the Toronto Catholic District School Board, our criteria are that students who score very high on a test of intellectual functioning, and specifically, in most cases, that means the top 2% among same-aged peers, qualify for an identification of giftedness. And here at our board, as many of you probably know, we do that in one of two ways. The first is our OLSAT 8 testing, which is our grade 4, usually our grade 4 cohort. Every single grade 4 student in our board is tested, has an opportunity to write the OLSAT 8. And those who score in the top 2% on measures that I'll talk about in just a second are eligible to be identified as gifted. The other way would be through an intelligence test, a result on an IQ test from some sort of assessment from outside the board. But in terms of what we do in-house, we use the OLSAT 8. So when we say that a student is gifted and that they have high intellectual ability, according to here to the criteria, we're talking about something that psychologists call problem solving. So kids who are gifted have advanced problem solving abilities compared to their same age peers, the other kids in the classroom. And again, requiring all these differentiated experiences that are in the definition. So again, what do we mean by problem solving? Advanced abilities in problem solving. Well, again, there are two general things that we look at that students would be tested on the OLSAT 8, for example. I'm just going to give you this. And I should say that the reason I'm presenting these to you like this is that we're going to contrast these reasoning abilities with some of the other skills that are required in schooling. So I do want to touch on these a little bit, just to give you a little bit of inside baseball in terms of the sorts of things that we're looking for. But here, this is a nonverbal problem solving test. So here we're asking students to detect, understand, and predict, in this case, what a visual pattern is. So if you go from one column to the next, you'll see one column, you've got circles, and the other column, you've got a triangle. And if we go from rows, we go to the top row, we have yellow shapes, and then the bottom row, we have a red shape. And so if we use our powers of problem solving, we come up with the correct answer, which is a red triangle, which should fit properly in that matrix, that 2x2 matrix. Of course, this is kind of a simple example that I'm presenting to you. I assure you, if we had a 3x3 matrix and a more complex visual design, these sorts of problems can get quite challenging. And it measures nonverbal pattern problem solving. Okay? It also seems to be related to the ability to solve new problems. So it predicts the sorts of how successful a student might be at solving problems that they've never encountered before. So we've got nonverbal, and the other one we have, of course, is verbal, which is, and I put the words in a similar sort of matrix here. That's the understanding the meaning. That's understanding the meanings of words and the relationships among words, right? So here again, we have in the first column, we have plane and boat. So we have modes of travel, means of transportation, whatever you want to say. And in the other column, we have air. And on the top, we have a plane that flies in the air. And in the lower row, we have boats that move in water. So again, in that case, the correct answer is water. I hope you all got it along with me. Again, this is similar to what I showed you earlier with the shapes, but in this case, we're using language. So just so you know, vocabulary in and of itself is a very good predictor of intellectual functioning. So the more words that a student can define, usually is a pretty good indicator of how high their intellectual functioning is. And if you think of language as sort of a measure of the sorts of experiences that you had in your lifetime, the language you use, the words you use, the way you say things, the things you're interested in, are very much mapped onto the experiences you had in the past. And so the verbal problem-solving ability addresses that, measures that, okay? So these simple tasks that I'm showing you here in terms of, problem-solving ability and the matrices and predicting and understanding, they are good predictors of how well a student will do at school. So the ability to solve problems both visually and verbally is going to mean that their potential for learning and for success at school is going to be high. But I think it's pretty clear to say that giftedness on its own doesn't guarantee success at school. There's a whole bunch of other factors that are important to success. And when I speak to kids, when I speak to families about this sort of thing, I sort of use this umbrella term, these other factors. What are you talking about, Joe? What other factors do we need? I'll talk about things like organization, regulation, and motivation, okay? These are characteristics that don't have anything directly to do with problem solving per se. They're kind of an independent set of skills. But these sorts of skills, organization, regulation, and motivation, become more and more important as schooling progresses, as we move from the primary grades to the higher grades, and of course into high school and beyond. These other factors become much more important. Problem-solving ability on its own isn't going to be enough. I mean, if we look at underachievement and giftedness sort of across school boards, they're not too much higher than you would expect in the general population. But on the other hand, dropout rates aren't zero either, right? So there are some students who are gifted who drop out of school every year. And if that's the case, then that probably means that significantly more stay in school but are underperforming. We know from the research that the underachievement, and anytime we see underachievement in a student who has giftedness, it's oftentimes related to not their ability to do the work and to pass their courses, but to be well in a social emotional way, in terms of relationships, in terms of stress management, in terms of coping, okay? What is important for us to know, and maybe the first thing we'll learn as we move along here, is that problems with well-being with this group of kids often appear as poor academic achievement first. So that's usually the first red flag that you see before other things come into play, okay? So sticking with that, I want to talk then about, just let me check here. We're still doing it. We're still going. I want to talk about traits and giftedness. And so if there are challenges in social emotional functioning, and if there are challenges that result in underachievement in the classroom, then what is it about giftedness that might bring those things on? And what I presented here is sort of a list of things that you typically see starting to happen in students who are gifted. And a lot of these things, I have to say, are there's a lot of overlap between them, as you'll see as I talk through them. That there are factors that sort of feed into one another. But it really all starts with the top there. So I'll go through sensitivity, perfectionism, social and academic isolation, challenges with self-regulation, and challenges with self-concept. And self-concept is one of those psychology words that I'll talk a little bit more about when we get there, okay? But we'll talk about these 5 things in turn. In terms of sensitivity, so if you go back to sort of those verbal and nonverbal tasks that I showed at the beginning, in order to do well on those tasks, you need to be able to sort of have an ability to detect small differences, a sensitivity for subtleties and nuance in language, nuance in a pattern, that maybe other students are not able to detect, okay? So spotting and avoiding errors or detection of minor differences. Students who are identified as gifted are highly conscientious. They have a fine eye for detail when they're motivated. And they want to do things right and things as they should be done. They're thorough when they're completing a task, okay? That all relates back to this idea of high sensitivity. What's really interesting is that while there's definitely a sensitivity, as I said, for these perceptual differences, for language, for thoughts, it turns out that students who are gifted also tend to be emotionally very sensitive as a group of kids. So because they have these advanced problem-solving abilities, not only do they have, are they able to detect differences for these patterns and for language and for similar sorts of tasks in the classroom, but they're also able to think deeply about their own thinking, and are deeply affected by their own moods, by other people's moods and emotions. Okay, and you may have noticed this if you do have a student, a child who is gifted at home. They have stronger emotional reactions overall compared to their same age peers. And this turns into a double-edged sword, right? As you probably have noticed already, they are very curious about things they're interested in. And the things they tend to like a lot. But there's sort of the flip side to that when they get upset or when they're stressed out, or when they're having trouble coping in general, there may very well be strong emotional outbursts that appear, okay? And so, and that's all part of the same process, right? It's all part of the same sensitivity that gives them the intellectual abilities that they have, are those same things that create those strong emotions and those strong reactions that we often see, okay? So that leads us to perfectionism. So oftentimes, as I said, with early on, children often do quite well in school at the beginning, where the demands of the classroom maybe aren't so high. They're very good at problem solving. There isn't a lot of organization, regulation, and motivation that's required. And so those early successes can create expectations for academic performances, right? Those expectations from themselves or maybe from the outside, but they're there. And so oftentimes there's an establishment, this belief that they're able to maintain a high, let's say near flawless level of achievement, often with very little effort. And again, the gifted identification and that conscientiousness that we're talking about means that they're going to work very hard to get things done their way and in that particular way according to their expectations. The problem arises oftentimes when challenges become more difficult, or as the content of the course load or multiple courses or multiple subject areas increase the need for this organization, regulation, and motivation, they can become distressed, especially when those unrealistic or unsustainable goals aren't met. They're also known for their stubbornness, reluctance to change, and maybe reluctance to ask for help. And again, if there is a perfectionistic sort of tendency in a student who's gifted, then that often means that they are not willing to change their rules, or to be adaptable when things change, including asking for help, right? Part of the thing maybe I want to tell you guys about today is that I think part of the conversation that could be happening more in the classroom, and if you have a gifted child at home, is this conversation about the importance of the skill set beyond whatever it is that giftedness is measuring, okay? That it doesn't matter really how smart you are, that inevitably there's going to come a point where you need to have this other skill set in place because of simply the challenges of schooling as they progress. Okay, so that's very important to have that conversation, and to make sure that they understand that early successes can continue if these other things remain in place. Okay, just wondering what we have here in terms of, looks like the chat is still quiet. Okay, social isolation. So there are two sorts of parts to this that I want to talk about in terms of social isolation. Because we're talking about kids who have advanced intellectual abilities, well-developed reasoning abilities, high conscientiousness, highly sensitive, highly motivated for things that they're interested in. Oftentimes, there can be a difficulty relating to other classmates in the classroom. That you may have seen this with many of your children, that students have interests or hobbies that may be different from their same age peers, and that may cause challenges and may create a disparity in their social group, that they may feel left out, they may feel alone, they may feel isolated. I've often said that oftentimes there's a distinction between students' academic development and their social development because of this disparity, this distinction. So there's that term. I didn't even realize there was a word for it until I found it in the literature: asynchrony development. This difference between their academic achievement and their social skills development. And it may be something that the gap may get bigger for because students may have challenges relating to the group. Okay. And let's be honest, I mean, all kids want that social interaction, and that social interaction is important for social learning and for emotional skill building. But that may be hindered in the regular classroom if they're having trouble connecting, because they can present as different oftentimes in the classroom. Okay. And I did put that bullet point in there that I should mention. Students may deliberately underachieve to fit in with the group. That has been something that was noted in the literature as well, that one of the reasons that a student may underachieve is due to them wanting to fit in. And I guess the other side to it, and I guess I already talked about it a little bit here, is that, I mean, there are limited social benefits to high academic achievement. Being the smarter person in the classroom isn't necessarily something that's going to help you socially, especially if that is going to cause division with other kids who are struggling in the classroom. Okay, so those social pressures and stigma may lead to exclusion and isolation. All right, and again, if you have that discrepancy between what's happening academically versus what's happening socially, there can be a tendency to see more emotional volatility and outbursts in children who are gifted. And you also may see another thing that happens commonly, in that these children may prefer to interact more with adults. They have interests that maybe match more interests that adults may have. They have the language to connect with adults, and they can speak socially. So that may be something that you found as well. So the flip side of social isolation is, of course, academic isolation, or what I'm going to call disengagement. But actually, what most of the research just calls plain old boredom. So again, a very common thing that we see in classrooms with many students who are gifted in that students will become disengaged if the content isn't presented in a particular way. And what's interesting here, and it came as a surprise to me as I was sort of looking through the literature, is that if you're asking students if you're asking gifted students on what they wish was changing in the classroom, they would say that it isn't so much the content of what they're being presented that isn't interesting, it's the pace of it. It's that the learning is too slow. Oftentimes teachers will present a lesson and then go back to review. And usually the students who are gifted want to keep going, want to keep pressing on, and don't want to review because they don't feel that they need to. Okay, so this type of challenge, the interesting thing about this is, given everything that I've talked about, sensitivity, isolation, challenges with social connections, boredom often doesn't look like boredom in the classroom, not the way we typically think about it. It may appear in other ways. It may appear with more emotionality. It may appear as avoidance, not wanting to engage at all in the classroom and not even come to school, perhaps. It may look like defiance or resentment. Okay, so it's here. This is one of those places, as parents in particular, parents and guardians, where you guys really have a role to play in terms of meeting with teachers, meeting with school staff, and talking about how differentiated learning or enrichment can happen. Even in the regular classroom, there are options this way. And not to be discouraged if you're seeing things like avoidance or defiance in the classroom. It's probably more related to a lack of engagement than it is to any sort of behavior problems per se. Okay. And I guess I should say, I want to add here too that I think another important part about parental discussions with teachers in terms of this enrichment piece is that I'm pretty sure that the students wanting to get that the student may not have a clear sense of what enrichment might look like in terms of verbalizing what their needs are in the classroom. So I think there needs to be that larger discussion in terms of what the additional enrichment might look like without having the student feel like they're just doing more work, right? We want to engage them in a way that motivates them, that keeps them connected and keeps them wanting to do more, okay? So what that breadth and depth looks like, I guess, is still something that can be discussed, and thankfully that is something that we can do through our meeting process. The last piece here is about self-regulation. Actually, the second last, because we'll get to self-concept too at the end. So again, this combination of emotional sensitivity, perfectionism, social isolation may lead to challenges in self-regulation. And the sorts of things that you might see in the classroom is difficulty coping with completion of work, underachievement, trouble connecting with friends, and trouble staying organized and engaged in the classroom. It also tends, I think we've all been in places where we've been in a place of high emotion and we've said or done something that we regret. There's no difference here. Students who have trouble with self-regulation often may take impulsive risks and do things that they would never do if they were in a more calm state of mind. Okay. I've worked with a lot of students in high school who are gifted and who have these sorts of challenges in terms of their organization, regulation, and motivation. And I saw this so many times that oftentimes their frustrations to these obstacles and their challenges become so difficult that they just stop working and completely disengage. It happened so many times that I actually called it the wall after a while and talked about it that way, that there can be success with this, with the giftedness identification, and a continuation of the success up to the point where students just can't seem to keep it all together. And then they seem to stop, leading to this avoidance of failure. This is a common thing that we see when there are challenges in completing and being engaged in schoolwork. It's It's easier to give up than to be wrong, or to not complete a task. So again, those are the sorts of things that we're looking for. And in particular, maybe a challenge when we have self-regulation. I tend to see this sort of more extreme reactions in high school, frankly, where students are juggling many different courses with competing deadlines and having to make priorities, decisions regarding priorities. But it can certainly happen in elementary school as well. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of these risk factors has to do with self-concept. And that's one of these psychology terms that talks about attitudes and beliefs about identity and ability. So that means, who do you think you are? Who do you want to be? What are those things you're good at? What are those skills you have to take you into the future? And self-concept really has a lot to do with the importance of aspirations, of future goals. What does the future look like? And you can clearly see that, if a student who has had some success early in the elementary years is all of a sudden struggling later on in their schooling, they may find themselves questioning their abilities and finding difficulty coping over not meeting their own expectations. And that leads to frustration. They don't know how to overcome these challenges. Again, because there really hasn't been a discussion about this other skill set that I talked about at the beginning. And this is kind of where we're at, in terms of this crossroads. And really the point I wanted to get to from bringing you up to this point, leading us from what is giftedness through to these other factors, is that, and I can't put it much better than the quote I have here at the bottom of this slide, the abilities to reason and think verbally or mathematically do not give one an advantage in the handling or understanding of one's own or others' emotions. So again, being gifted gives great potential, tremendous potential for success. And many students who are able to develop these other abilities do remarkably well and are incredibly successful in their schooling and in post-secondary schooling as well, and beyond in life. But for those students who have trouble developing those skills, this poses a real challenge. And so we need to be able to create environments and put in supports that can help them to develop these skills, to develop this skill set of organization, regulation, and motivation. Okay, so let's get into that. Oh, sorry, one last thing before I get into this, and this is just a flag because I do need to mention this is very important, that all of the risk factors that I've talked about here are particular to students who are gifted. Again, stemming from that high sensitivity and leading to all those other things that I talked about. But the risk factors for difficulties with wellness and social emotional well-being increase with these additional risk factors. So if we have a gifted student who's a member of a marginalized or vulnerable group, LGBTQ2S+, or BIPOC population, Black, Indigenous, person of color, there's also an additional risk to that, over and above what I've talked about in terms of students who are gifted. And this is also the case for students with an additional exceptionality. Okay, we have students at our board who are gifted, but who also have identifications of learning disability or an identification of autism. And so we need to be particularly careful with these groups as well, in that there are risk factors that are already associated with these particular groups, and that gets increased when you start putting these different things together. Okay. On to protective factors. So the first thing with academic engagement. So obviously, if we have a student who's bored, who's disengaged, who's reacting, and who is emotional in the classroom and having trouble connecting with friends and all of the things that we talked about, we need to have some strategies for re-engagement. And the academic re-engagement really comes to, well, the first thing I talked about before, increased pacing. So an enrichment program may can start with presenting content at a rate that is a bit more rapid than would be usually, or having strategies to deal with what happens after a lesson is presented. So instead of going back to review, enrichment may look at other, taking the curriculum and adding to it through higher level thinking, through creation, the creative process, and getting away from that memorization that often takes place at the initial teaching of that lesson. So again, this is a great opportunity, for example, to have students engage with a topic that's related to what is being taught in the classroom, and to have some independent work related to that, something creative, a project that they could do, and sort of extend beyond what's already being presented in the classroom. This presents a couple of good things. One that forces sort of this discussion, this social interaction with teachers in terms of what the creative process in this extra project might look like, and what interests the student might have to actually engage in these projects. But of course, it also promotes creativity and validation. So these kids feel good about taking whatever they have and building from it, right? Building into that curiosity, building into that interest that they already have. And again, there isn't necessarily a requirement for extra content per se to be presented. A lot of that can be done independently through the student's own interests and motivation and engagement. So higher level thinking, creativity, and getting away from memorization, opportunities for independent work. The one thing I did mention, and this is probably true for kids who aren't just gifted, but for everyone, is an increased use of technology. A lot of the research that I looked at in terms of what gifted students want in the classroom is this idea that all of their lives, they're being surrounded by technology and using technology in the classroom. And it seemed, or using technology outside of the classroom, rather. And it seems as though in a lot of cases, using technology in the classroom is limited. One of the things that definitely promotes academic engagement in this group is the increased use of technology. And it's something that should be promoted and is part of. And I'm happy to say it's definitely part of our gifted withdrawal and gifted congregated programs for sure. That technology is a central piece of what they do. Again, through this creative process, this higher level thinking, it naturally leads to interaction with caring adults, certainly with teachers, and bouncing ideas off of them to get these projects going, as well as that last piece, the role for parent and guardian advocacy. As I said before, what enrichment looks like for each student is probably very different. And what gets included as an enrichment in the process is probably going to occur after a discussion or maybe a few discussions. And thankfully, that's something that we can always do. But I think that given the risks for academic isolation of students in the classroom, the role for your advocacy in that is very, very important. And so that's definitely part of academic engagement. In terms of protective factors, certainly a sense of belonging is something that should be encouraged given everything I've talked about. Increasing peer engagement in the classroom can be an important part of skill building. And it doesn't necessarily need to be something that happens in a gifted withdrawal classroom. It can happen in the regular classroom as well. And that can simply be done through the teaching of social skills or emotional learning for the classroom. And I want to say a couple of things there. One, I'm not talking about therapy. I'm not talking about sort of, clinically addressing these problems, but really teaching these skills as a group. And let's face it, the last 2 years with this pandemic, we all could have used a bit of brushing up with our social skills and our social emotional learning. We have here in special services in our social work and psychology departments programs that we can deliver in the classroom to support these social skills and these social emotional learning programs. And they're fun. They bring classes together. They engage the classroom. And so these are things that are something that can be implemented in the regular classroom and that we can all benefit from. But of course, there's also gifted program, this whole idea of birds of a feather, and that we definitely seen from our gifted programming that students who are gifted do very well when they're around other students who are also gifted, realizing that they aren't alone, that they have kids who share similar interests, who think in similar ways, and who they can collaborate with on projects. Tremendous opportunity for social engagement that way. Birds of a feather stick together, which is why I have it here. So they're sort of supports that we can put in place both in the regular classroom and in the gifted classroom when the time comes. And in addition, those social supports need to also come from the caring adults. Okay, we need to be mindful for these needs of academic and social belonging. Okay, as I said before, oftentimes disengagement and boredom doesn't look like boredom. It can look different, and it may be difficult to spot. So it's very important that that we be aware that we keep having discussions like this and letting you guys know that these are things to look out for and to things to be concerned about. Again, conversations with these students for the expression, clarifications of their aspirations and goals, getting them to talk about their future, getting them to talk about their self-concept, about who they are and who they want to be, validating, supporting, praising, all of the things that all children want. It should be part of that as well. And again, that last point, talking about organization, regulation, and motivation, is what I said before. These are skills that all of us kind of need to get on in the world. And it's going to be the case for our gifted students as well. Okay. And that has to be part of the discussion in terms of consciously, deliberately going about learning and engaging with these ideas and these skills so that there can be success and coping when the need arises. So, is there a cause for concern? Is there something that we should be concerned about? Well, as I've said here, mental wellness concerns emerge initially as difficulties with underachievement or disengagement. Okay, that's where you're going to see things first, and they're likely to emerge in elementary school. They may become magnified in high school, but you'll certainly see them in the early grades if they are going to happen. That's likely to happen. And as I said, engagement, validation from grown-ups, from adults are central. They're very important to these students, as are the challenges with this being different part with same age peers. Okay. And again, going back to the idea of their sensitivity, when we're seeing these sorts of reactions in the classroom or anywhere else for that matter, these sensitivity and emotional reactions are things that we need to take seriously and that we can address. And we can talk about that right now. Let me just take a sec. This is a good time to pause. Susie, anything in the Q&A? I don't see anything up here.
Hi, Joseph. There are a few questions in the Q&A. Do you want
Okay.
me to email them to you, or do you want to look at them?
I can't. I don't have access to it here. Maybe can you read them for me? Is that too much time?
Sure. The first one says, I've noticed problems with teachers crushing the spirit, abilities, and talents of gifted students, perhaps because they feel threatened by the students' intelligence. We have seen this in both the elementary and high school programs. It is a huge source of anxiety for gifted students and needs to be addressed.
No, agreed. I think there can be a lot of, as I said, it's a good point. There's often misunderstandings in terms of the reactions of students to wanting, I guess, and what I wanted to say before is, I think there's a difficulty oftentimes in conveying the message of what that enrichment looks like. And I think, if there is some struggle with the teacher understanding the needs of the student, then that really should be brought to a team meeting. It needs to be something that gets discussed in terms of, and we do have a gifted team here as well that can support as well in terms of providing suggestions for enrichment opportunities. I mean, I want to turn away from the idea of sort of teacher versus student to something more collaborative where we can problem solve in terms of getting to an idea of what type of curriculum and school supports can we put in place so that the student feels engaged and validated in the things that they do. Any other, Susie?
Okay, so the next one is, it sounds almost on the spectrum. That was a comment, I guess, made by one of the attendees. And then the other one, same attendee, said, my daughter liked asynchronous online learning because she could go faster.
Yeah.
And then the other question, same person, is what percentage of gifted are likely to do well in life versus not well?
Well, okay, lots of questions there. Let's go to the first one. In terms of the spectrum question, there is, in terms of the sensitivity issue, there is a similarity in terms of that high emotional sensitivity that we often see in gifted students. As I said before, those risk factors, when you add in someone who has autism spectrum disorder, a student with ASD, that emotionality may increase even more. But yes, there are very much similarities between what you see in gifted students and with high functioning autism. And of course, the two categories overlap. Yes, there are many students in our gifted programs who also have a diagnosis of autism. Oh, sorry, Susie, what was the next one?
The next one was, my daughter liked asynchronous online learning because
Yep.
she could go faster.
Exactly. Case in point. It's all about the pacing, not so much about the content. Yeah, validate that checks that box. So, and I guess the last one was about
what percentage of gifted are likely
Oh.
to do well in life versus not well?
Yeah. So no, that's very interesting. I didn't find any specific information on that, although my impression is that the success, by whatever measure you're going to use, is about the same as in the general population. So there is no advantage, but there's no disadvantage either. So it's about the same. So once again, speaks to the importance of developing these alternate skills that we all need for life. Let's face it. Coping, organizing, staying motivated are things we all need to develop, but they occur independently of whatever it is that whatever abilities giftedness gives you.
Okay, we have lots more here. Shall I
Okay.
go on? Okay.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, since using ALSAT, do you notice a difference in which students are identified compared to the former assessment for gifted identification?
No, it's a good question. That's one of the most amazing things that we've found. This 2% that I spoke about at the beginning of our presentation, exactly the same. Almost every single year, the cohort that we have, the percentage of students who meet our criteria strictly, as I said, there are other sorts of factors involved, but if you're looking at that 2%, yes, the OLSAT 8 does that extremely well.
Okay, next one. When should we approach teachers in high school? The semester goes so fast and there are so many teachers.
As soon as possible. Yeah, I when it comes to these sorts of interventions, I'm always the sooner the better. And the reason for that, I guess, too, is that, and maybe I mentioned it before in terms of important to start the discussion and start putting things in place with the understanding that those things are probably going to have to be adapted. So better to start the process sooner, even if it's late in the year, to get something in place to build on as you move, and not to wait for those sorts of things before they get worse.
Okay, so the next one is, our son has gone through the gifted stream from grade 4 to grade 8 and shifted to high school where he entered into STEAM program.
Yep.
Many of the characteristics match our son, and he has had some challenges in certain areas, but excelled in others. He has difficulties asking questions as he does not want to be singled out. How can we encourage more class engagement? Yeah.
So again, those, well, I mean, it's going to depend, again, case by case. I don't want to sort of give, specific advice in this case. I don't know. I'm just hearing about it now. But I think what I would say is there are lots of strategies in terms of skill building for engagement in the classroom. And those should be, if that's, could start with a discussion with the classroom teacher in terms of strategies for asking questions, but it could also be brought to the larger team. Social work and psychology may have some suggestions in terms of strategies to implement that maybe could be tailored to the needs of your child. It's going to, there is no cookie cutter answer to these sorts of things, right? Each student really is unique, even though, all of these factors are common to them. There's still a person there, and we want to tailor whatever the needs are to that particular case. So yes, definitely investigate further. Definitely start with the teacher too, because I have heard of cases, for example, where the teacher may have a signal for when the student wants to ask a question, or they have an agreement that the teacher will point to the student once a week or once during the class time. So there are ways around it to encourage these sorts of conversations to have. But again, that's going to depend student to student. Let's keep going.
Okay, why don't we offer gifted programs for high school students at TCDSB?
I really can't answer that question. We've never had them as far as I've been here. I've been here since 2010. However, we do have enrichment programming in all of our high schools, as far as I know. So there still are opportunities for extra enrichment. It doesn't require a giftedness identification per se, but what I would do is contact whatever high school your son or daughter may be going to and ask about their enrichment programming. I'm pretty sure that just about every high school has something like that, where there are enrichment opportunities.
Okay, next one is, do you think it's genetic or environmental?
Definitely both. The research is pretty clear that yes, of course, there are always genetic factors to these sorts of things, but there are lots of cultural and environmental factors as well. And we've known that for a long, long time. There are lots of things that students are born with, but there are other things, of course, that a good supportive environment can definitely cultivate and enrich as well. So yeah, do I want to give a percentage? No, let's say about equal, about 50-50 for each.
Okay, what kind of social engagements can be included in the regular classroom to ensure gifted students do not feel isolated? And how do we get teachers to be aware of this and implement this?
Yeah, I think part of it is, and there are, as I said, social programs that can be implemented at a classroom level, and that are fun and engaging, and we don't want to isolate students with this sort of intervention as well. This is something that all students can use anyway. And in terms of informing teachers, well, that's what presentations like this are like. As I said, we do have a gifted team that teachers can consult with as well. A wonderful group of people who can give recommendations for enrichment and for the social engagement that we've been talking about.
Okay, so I've had significant challenges finding therapists, coaches, programs, camps, etc. for my gifted child who's also autistic. Any tips on how to find or choose the right resource for one's child?
That's a good question. There are some outside agencies that do support students who are gifted. I don't have anything handy with me. If I maybe take that back and see if I can share that with the group, I will do so. I don't have anything offhand, but I know that there are places where these sorts of skill building programs are in place, and that would benefit this group of kids. But I will take that back. Thank you.
Okay. What supports are available for grade 3 for identified gifted students in the regular classroom in schools that do not have a specific gifted program already in place?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So again, there are opportunities for there to be an IEP developed. So an individual education plan can be developed to incorporate enrichment programming into the curriculum. And that would include a lot of the sorts of things that I spoke about. Again, we have a gifted team that can support the school in doing that. And that would be, that could be initiated by contacting your school principal and having a team meeting to discuss what that programming might look like.
Okay, there's a few more questions. Do you want
Sure.
to keep going? Okay.
Yeah, let's keep going. It's while we're here. Yeah.
Okay, so are gifted children usually hyperactive?
No, that would be a separate diagnosis. I wouldn't call them hyperactive. There may be some portion of gifted students who also have attention challenges, but no, that's not a general characteristic. It's more the emotionality that seems to be more common in students who are gifted.
Another question is helping the child's teacher keep the child engaged. I'm trying to sort of reword it so it doesn't give any personal details away. So this parent's interested in approaching a teacher, doesn't want to offend the teacher, but wants to let them know that sometimes there's issues with engagement, and they've tried to sort of suggest what the interests of the child are. And so they're wondering if there's some strategies you can help with.
Well, there could be strategies in terms of, trying to connect with the teacher and have a discussion in such a way that that you can actually have the discussion about what that student may want in the classroom, or what as parents you're seeing might be an area of need. I'm getting, is that right, Susie, that in terms of engaging with, because there needs to be some sort of meeting, there needs to be some sort of discussion with folks at the table talking about what the needs of this student are.
Yes, he's talking about,
there, right?
He's talking about the regular, I mean, that's in quotations, classroom teacher. So I think it's just, they're proposing what interests the child has and are looking to have those built on.
Yeah. I guess from what I understand of the question anyway, if there's a, if this is a case where we have a student who's in our gifted withdrawal program, and so there's a teacher of the gifted as well as a regular classroom teacher, there may be a discussion between those two teachers, for example, or a team meeting that includes those two teachers at the table. I just want to make sure that we have there has to be some sort of discussion or some means of having a discussion, whether that's something that's mediated through a principal, if there are concerns that way. Wherever there's a gap, there's a bridge. There has to be some sort of way of connecting and having this discussion so that there's transparency as far as what the needs of this student are. And as well as, the supports of the gifted team or the psychologist, the local team psychologist as well, can support for those sorts of interventions as well.
Okay, what else have we? What supports can be provided to gifted students who feel bullied and isolated because their classmates feel they are different, especially when the school provides little or no support in this regard?
Again, those are discussions that need to be had at the school level with the principal involved. I mean, anything having to do with bullying or these sorts of supports we have, and maybe this is a good point here because we're getting lots of questions. I'm going to sort of skip to here, just so it's important here that it's critical that everyone know that there are supports at school that are available, and that part of the solution to the problem has to involve a process that looks something like this. Okay, so there are opportunities to have meetings with teachers, with the principal or vice principal. There are other support staff that are available at the school, guidance counselor, chaplain, CYW, and so on. And if those avenues don't work, then we do have other mental health professionals that are assigned to schools. We have the school social workers, the school psychologists. So there are different points of connection that you can go to in order to do this sort of problem solving. And I want to just sort of bring that up because I know we're short on time and there's still a little bit of content, but at the very least, it looks like it looks like the questions are sort of centering around school supports and engagement. And it needs to happen at this level. That's where the discussions need to happen. Again, the school social worker and the school psychologist make up a larger part of the school team, and they get called in when maybe the local team needs extra support. But there are supports that are available, and I encourage you to speak to your school principal to access those supports. And it isn't here, and maybe I should have added it, but I want to say again that there is, a gifted team as well. We have an assessment and programming teacher. We have 2 psychologists who are also part of that team, who are also helping in support of students to get whatever needs are required and to implement whatever maybe changes to an IEP or other sorts of interventions in the classroom that are required. So I want to make sure that you guys at least see this in terms of making sure that some discussion has to take place. And it may take, in terms of a meeting or two to get to the right group of people to solve that problem, but this is going to be the process by which we go through this, as it is with any sort of with any student concern. The process is identical to what you're seeing here.
All right, do you want to keep going, or do you want
How
to?
many questions do we have left here?
They are rolling in.
Oh no. Well, you know what?
Yes.
Let's stay a little longer. If I'm happy to stay and answer as much as I can. Again, I just want to make it clear that I really can't address specific individual student problems. This is, it's not meant to be sort of an individual intervention case. I know nothing about these cases. What I can do is direct you to the process of getting these solutions, of having the supports put in place, because the supports are there. They are available. Everything I've talked about is something that we can put in place and something that can be implemented both in the gifted programs as well as in the regular classroom. We've done both. So maybe we'll take a few more. We'll go for a few more minutes, and then maybe I can take the other things back as well, if need be.
Okay, I think you might, we could answer this if we respond with the video, but this person is looking for a coach to help prepare their child regarding organization skills, self-regulation, and are wondering if you had any recommendations.
I don't have any recommendations per se. A lot of the organization piece, though, is part of what might be called, well, you could probably find that sort of thing in ADHD coaching, which is, again, it's going to deal with organization and sort of the sort of the planning piece of schooling. That may be an avenue you want to pursue. If you look up ADHD coaching, there are plenty of psychologists and other mental health professionals who could support that way.
Okay, one parent is asking, does this account for socioeconomic differences?
So socioeconomic differences, so as has been well established for a long time, low socioeconomic status is related to an increased risk. Whatever risks we talked about today, certainly those things would be increased in a case where there are concerns having to do with finances and things like that at home. Yep.
Okay, are there opportunities for gifted high school students to pursue leadership opportunities if the Scott High School they are attending only has AP program? What do I do if my child becomes bored?
Again, I can't answer that specifically in terms of my understanding of what each school has in terms of their programming. I know that, as I said, that there are enrichment opportunities at different high schools, and maybe that's something we need to sort of formalize a little bit. I will make a note of that.
And I think that's about it. The rest are a little more specific.
Yeah.
There's one, how can I get my gifted child to meet their full potential?
Yeah. Again, I think, the discussion about and maybe we can go back and I can finish with this. My apologies for flipping through these slides. So the initial part of what we're talking about in terms of finding what those needs are often has to do with just connecting with your child, okay? Speaking to them, talking to them, listening, acknowledging, understanding, giving them a chance to lead, giving them a chance to talk to you. I'm hoping that's something that's happening already, but if it isn't, this is the first opportunity to do that. The one thing that's important, and again, I'm slide skipping only because we're pressed for time, is that oftentimes as parents, we want to fix problems. We want to have solutions. We want things to just stop and to find the solution to our problems. But oftentimes that's not what's needing to be happening at the beginning. Oftentimes it really just is about starting that conversation and listening. And as much as you may want to resist doing so, you know, offering solutions often isn't going to get you where you want to be, at least initially. That listening piece is very important. So if you are speaking to your child and they do tell you, you know, Mom, Dad, I'm bored. I don't like school. It's boring. There's nothing there for me. Then, you know, then you're on the right track. Not necessarily about fixing it, but at least you know what the problem is and you can validate that and say, okay, tell me more about that. What do you mean? What is it about school that isn't, you know, that isn't interesting to you? Okay. Giving your child opportunities to open up and letting them lead the discussion. In terms of picking, you know, in terms of improving things and working on things, my simple strategy would be work with your son or daughter to pick one thing that they want to change and start working on that one thing. Pick one task at a time and work on that. What are the strategies that can be used? What is it that you can improve? I think trying to avoid fixing everything all at once it's just going to be counterproductive and usually doesn't get you very far. But if you can pick one thing, and again, part of that discussion is what's important to the student. What is it that they want to change? What is it that they feel is most important that they change? And working on just that one piece is definitely important. Picking a routine, picking a structure, picking a task, picking a goal. And rewarding for those goals, you know, having time for play, having time for leisure, not always not having things always be stressful or you know, or work, but having an opportunity to have fun as well. Linking all of those things together, being engaged in the moment, as I have on this slide, are all important pieces to have. I really think that, again, the discussions that we have with your child at home, at the school level, are really all about being specific about the sorts of interventions that are required, and picking one thing to work on at a time and seeing what strategies could be put in place for those one things. All right, Susie, how are we doing?
We are doing okay. I kind of lost a little bit of connectivity there for a minute. So
okay.
Hopefully everything's
all right.
okay.
No, hopefully most of that got through. It's almost what time have we got here?
It's 8:15 right now.
8:15. Yep. I want to respect everyone's time. We can certainly look at the chat and any other questions and maybe sort of summarize some of the things. I know there were questions about particular programs. Enrichment opportunities in high school also was certainly a big topic. Any recommendations for supports outside? And I think that might be worth going back, taking that back to the gifted team and having a discussion about that in terms of what supports we can put in place at the school level, certainly. But I think we will end it there. I'm just going to go to the end here. I want to thank everyone for your attention and thank you for your great questions. I hope this was informative. I hope you learned something new. I sure did researching it for you and I was happy to present it for you, but otherwise, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Okay, so I've stopped the recording
Mhm.
and I've made copies of all the questions, so I'll send those to you. And
Thank
if
you.
there's some that you want to include
Yep.
information, then